Welcome to Fall, Rise, Give, a space where we invite you to dig into the real cause of your suffering, looking at opportunities for growth with a change in your beliefs, thoughts, and actions so you can be your true self and be inspired. Join us as we explore life's ups and downs and navigate the twists and turns, sharing stories of resilience, hope, and the transformative power of giving back. Whether you're looking for a change, in recovery, or simply seeking inspiration, this podcast is your go-to for candid conversations, raw emotions, and a whole lot of heart. Tune in and discover how to fall, rise, and give back on life's extraordinary journey. Welcome to another edition of Fall, Rise, Give, turning issues and problems into opportunities. And, it works by being your true self. I'm Bartender Bob. That's Kumar. And our guest this time around is Andy Campbell. Andy, thanks for joining us today. So tell me, who is Andy Campbell?
Andy Campbell is somebody who has somehow survived a number of personal setbacks throughout his life. Everything from been sexually molested as a child through growing up bullied and losing his mother to cancer and estrangement from his father, and then eventually building his own family only to find out he's going to get stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and then surviving that long enough to find the body of his son, his youngest son, who took his own life. So I guess my goal is for Andy Campbell to be someone who persists and is persistent and perseveres through a lot of things. I decided that if one was going to go through those kinds of setbacks, that it might be helpful to others to kind of hear the story, so that when they hit the wall and they think, I can't go any further, or I'm going to quit, or I'm not sure how to make it, that someone who has been through a few things could say, you know what, you can make it. Don't quit. This is not over. Give the universe a chance to change things for you, and keep fighting the struggle.
It's not for anybody, but you definitely have persevered. Yeah. So Andy, it sounds like you've been through a lot. What are some of the tools that you use to persevere? Is there anything specific that you say, I do this, I go work out in the morning, or I read the Bible, or I go do this? You said the word universe, which means that you're generally accepting of a higher power. Any sort of tools or any sort of ideas that you think have helped you that could help other people?
I believe there are. To me, those are all kind of tactical execution things that we have to do to persevere. I honestly can't remember when, probably a couple decades ago, thinking about how, what beliefs did I have that had kind of helped me persevere through some of these things. First thing I thought of was, my ancestors had it probably a lot worse than I do. There was a lot of things they didn't have, and somehow they survived and continued forward. So I looked at them and I said, okay, what are the things that they left? And not, the difficult things they left, but what are the good things that they left that they taught me or that I could learn from them? And I came up with 6 words, and I tattooed 3 of those words on each arm. So when I look in the mirror in the morning, I can see them and remind myself. So one thing you can do is find some meaning, as Viktor Frankl would say in Man's Search for Meaning. Find some meaning and put it where you are reminded about that meaning, right? So that when the shit hits the fan, and it hits it hard, you've at least got a tether, something to tether you back to why you are doing what you're doing. And so for me, those 6 words were honor, courage, determination, perseverance, wisdom, and success. And in my mind, those each built one on another. If you started with an honorable effort, then when the shit hit the fan, you would have courage. And if you showed courage over and over again, that's kind of what determination is. It's just courage over and over again. You are determined in the face of adversity. And if you show determination over and over again, you have persevered, at least through that event. And if you persevere, my grandfather used to say, experience is what you get just after you needed it. And so if you persevere long enough and you collect enough experience, you should become wiser. if you pay attention to that experience and those lessons. And the wiser you are, the more success you should have, whatever that endeavor is, right? So those were kind of the meaning that I hung on to. And then I started writing down kind of the meta phrases, kind of the what I came to call my core beliefs, but the meta phrases that represented a lot of operational and tactical things underneath them. So I came up with 15 core beliefs over the years. Started out with 5, and then that grew into 10, and then that grew into 15. And at 15, I said, there's too many to remember, so I'm going to stop at 15. Everything has to kind of fit under those 15. And that's what I rely on. And so, things like no one outruns the universe reminds me, Kumar, that I need to exercise, right? I need to go out and do those things. I need to spend time meditating. For me, that is remembering what Christians call God's word, the Bible, like to meditate on those things and find inspiration from them. That may mean exercising. It may mean being kind in my relationships, but it reminds me to do those things that need to be done because no one outruns the universe. I think the universe is built on certain principles, and you work outside those guardrails, and the universe has a way of snapping you back into alignment.
So what does meditation look like for you?
Meditation to me is taking the opportunity to quiet my mind so that what I'm hearing is the still small voice and not the really loud yappy voice, right? So it's quieting my mind for whatever period of time that is, so that I might hear. I just think, Kumar, you said a higher power, whether it's God or it's the universe, whatever someone uses that refers to, I just don't think that entity speaks loudly. I think that entity tends to speak softly. That's how, in my mind, that's how I try to sort out, is this fear? Is this chaos talking to me? Or is this a good instruction I should pay attention to? And if it's the quieter voice, I tend to listen to that. I am working to listen to that more than the other voice. But that's kind of what I think, to me, meditation is whatever technique one uses, whether that's a breathing technique. A lot of times, so I do acupuncture. Now I do it every other week. When I was going through cancer treatments, I did it every week. But as soon as they start putting the needles in, I go into like this meditative state, like everything becomes quiet. I don't know. I'm kind of like Pal's dog. It happened. And then every time I got the needles, it just kept happening. And, the acupuncturist walks in, now almost with the first, when I hear the paper tear on the first needle, when they pull it out of the sterile pack, I get drowsy. I actually go to sleep, but everything just quiets for me. And so I think, to me, that's what meditation is.
Andy, you've written a book, right? Can you tell us about the book?
Yeah, it was, my family physician thought that I should write down some of these things because he had been with me through a few of these events. And I'm not much of a writer, so it seemed to me to be kind of a pointless effort because I don't write. It's not something I sit down and do. I don't journal well. I'd rather use, talking to a phone or talk into some app or use voice, speech to text. It's just difficult for me. It's not my primary mode of communication. But I had to take a medical leave of absence last year because the cancer treatments and everything just really, eventually after 6 years, just kind of rolled up on me a bit. And I kind of ran out of gas for a little while. So I took a 90-day medical leave from work. And toward the end of that, I don't know, I got inspired to do something with it. And I started out just taking the 15 core beliefs. I didn't want to write just kind of regurgitate all the bad stuff that had happened. I wanted to kind of take the 15 core beliefs, work to put them in context, and give examples to people so that they could adopt them, and then adapt them to themselves, right? I'm not a big believer in that there's a one size fits all for anything. People take what they need and they adapt it to their way of living, their way of thinking. And so that was the point of the goal. It was overcoming life's toughest setbacks, 15 core beliefs, to turn challenges into opportunities. And because that's the way I kind of looked at the struggles that I've had. And so I ended up putting some things together. And at some point you get to a point of no return. So the only thing I could do was find an editor. So I went to Fiverr and hired an editor, and she looked at it and said, "Wow, you really need an editor." And she worked on it a lot, and then told me that her initial quote before seeing it was going to be slightly less than her final quote after seeing my work product. But she, put it in order, and I think it came out pretty well for someone who's not a writer. And then once I was that far in, well, you kind of had to go get somebody to format it and put a book cover on it. And next thing I knew, I had a book on Amazon. So it really wasn't like I started somewhere with a real purpose. It's just one day I kind of got tired of having it rattle around in my head. So I started to write it down, and over 3 or 4 weeks, it ended up on Amazon.
So it was only a 3-4 week process. That seems like it's pretty quick to get a book down and on paper and add to Amazon.
Yeah. I don't like when it started. Well, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know. Maybe it was 2 months. It seemed very quick. That's all I know. Like it seemed, because I think one of my hurdles in getting started was I thought I'm not going to put a year and a half into this, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like dealing with coming back from a setback. Like sometimes you just have to take one step at a time, and then before you know it, you've accomplished something. And so I really didn't think about how I was going to write a book. I just kind of thought about, well, you got these 15 core beliefs. What if you just kind of put some words around them? And then that kind of turned into, well, that doesn't really explain it that well. Maybe you put a few more words around it. And so each day I would kind of come back and do a little bit more. And I had the time to focus on it. So I guess it was one of those, I don't know, I guess there's writer's block, and then somehow there's like writer's inspiration. And I kind of, in that period of time, so maybe it was 8 weeks. I don't know. It wasn't very long at all. Like I found the editor, but my significant part of pulling together the ideas and kind of doing my original manuscript probably took me 2 or 3 weeks to work.
Was it therapeutic for you to do that?
Yeah. It was, I think, mainly because I didn't focus on, I didn't go into details around child molestation. I didn't go into, my mother died with cancer. I kind of used, what was therapeutic about it was that it actually helped me think about the problem or the challenges, less about the challenges and more stay focused on, kind of the belief system and the techniques that I use to get through them. And it was kind of therapeutic to get it out. And I've done a few podcasts now, and that's actually helped, some. But writing it down and feeling like I had accomplished something with all of that experience, that was gratifying, right? And that's whether anybody ever bought the book or not. It was like just like getting something out was it did feel like a success.
What's the name of the book?
The name of the book is Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks. 15 core beliefs. 15, I think it's called 15 breakthrough core beliefs to turn challenges into opportunities. If you look up my name on Amazon, it'll pop up.
Of the 15 beliefs, you mentioned a few of them: courage, wisdom.
Those are the 6 things I got from my ancestors. The 15 core beliefs are kind of built on top of those.
They are. What would you say are the top 3 that people need to be able to live a life to overcome challenges?
I think one is no one outruns the universe. I think, that can be applied in a host of ways, but the intent behind it really was to say, embrace humility and acceptance of the situation. Be realistic with yourself about how you ended up where you are. What part you may have played in that. Not that, again, like that doesn't apply to things like actually child sexual abuse, because there is no consent there. But I'm talking about, like for me in cancer, there were things I probably contributed, along the way. I partied pretty hard, and frankly, from all the traumatic events before, I think I held a lot of stuff inside that, probably didn't help. A lot of emotions inside that didn't help my body deal with the situation well. But generally speaking, it's about humility and acceptance and understanding, for me, that the universe has guardrails and you need to operate inside those guardrails. One of those is that it will not let you go on forever without confronting the things that have happened to you in your life that may be contributing to less than stellar behaviors, right? So eventually, it brought me to a place where I had to confront some things, right? I had to deal with how those events in my life had caused me to interact with people differently than I should. I became far less trusting of people. I suspected that there was always a downside. I looked a lot more negatively on life. It was always about managing risk and controlling situations. And I think eventually the universe just kind of helped me see that I needed to deal with those things so that I could live a happier life. For a long time, I survived them, but I was not happy. I thought I was happy, but I wasn't really happy. And there wasn't much joy in my life. And so the universe kind of boxed me into a place where I had to think about those things pretty hard and confront some of my challenges.
It's kind of funny. You said you thought you were happy, but you weren't happy. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I didn't really realize it until, after I found my son's body, after his passing, we went through, my wife and I and the family went through some grief counseling, obviously. And then I'd heard about this therapy technique called EMDR. I don't know if you guys have heard of it before. Back to No One Outruns the Universe. I remember the therapist telling me what EMDR was like and what it was going to be like. And I knew it wasn't good when she was taking notes of like the things in my life. She made me, wanted me to give her a rundown of everything from like early childhood through, and she kept turning the page and continuing to write. So I knew that wasn't a positive sign, because it didn't stop on the first page. But she told me, I said, I don't want to do this. I've got all this stuff tucked away. I've thought about it. I've dealt with it. It's all tucked away. It's all good. I don't want to have to relive these experiences and deal with it. And she said, Andy, you only have one choice. One option in this choice is it's to do it or not do it. And the outcome of that choice will be if you do it, we will spend somewhere between 8 and say 20 hours working through this, 1 hour at a time working through this. But it'll be less than the time of one day. So basically, you'll take one day out of your life and you will confront these things, and we will work to give you a way that thinking about them and dealing with them doesn't cause these tremendous, like physical, visceral, emotional reactions. Like I could think about my son without breaking down and, turning into a puddle of tears. And she said, or if you decide not to do this, then you will live with these things every moment of every day for the rest of your life. And so to me, that was kind of, I was working to outrun the universe. I was working to kind of avoid that confrontation. And the universe just kind of brought me back and said, okay, here's your options. You can continue to try to outrun reality, but you're going to deal with these things every moment of every day for the rest of your life. When I went through EMDR, that's when I realized how much these things had affected me. And, she would ask me questions like, tell me a happy moment from your childhood. Tell me my wife would, if you ask my wife that question, she'd give you like a list, and she had a pretty rough life. She had a very difficult childhood, but she'd give you a list, well, I enjoyed playing here and the smell of fresh cut grass and all. She'd go through a list. I could not come up with one. I mean, I really struggled. I would sit there and the therapist would just stare at me for 5 minutes. I was like, I can't think of one. And as we went through that process, I realized that I hadn't actually been happy or joyful about being alive. I had just been alive. And the more I kind of worked through that in an active way, I would find myself in the car driving down the road and I would see something and it would make me happy. And I was like, wow, so that's what it feels like. Like, it's kind of like if you saw a picture in gray and then all of a sudden it was colorized and you'd be like, oh, I'll be damned. That's what it looks like. It's hard to explain, Bob. It just changed,
So here's a question right from your Amazon page. It says, are you too hurt to find joy? Are you? Or were you?
I was. I was 100%. And I think that's where, when I wrote that line, um, I had actually, the funny thing, I had described this. I described the situation. I think at that time I was using Chat GPT, like to come up with like what you were supposed to put on an Amazon page, like I'd given an example and I had I'd written down some of my experiences and it came up with that line. And I was like, that's what the hell I've been trying to say. That's it. I was too hurt to find joy. I was too hurt to be happy. And, which is, to me, I apologize, guys. That's a great segue. So let me, if I can divert just a second. I learned something when my son took his life. I believe he told us at age 9 that he thought he would kill himself. And I don't know, yeah, 9. It wasn't like a sporadic, it was spur of the moment, I believe, but it wasn't like something that just popped up. He had no connection to the internet at 9. He died at 18. So you think back, this was way back when he was 9 years old. I say he died in 21. It was 18, back 9 years. So you say, 2012. He didn't really have, at 9 years old, he didn't have internet access. He didn't know anyone who had taken their own life. He didn't know anyone who knew anyone who took their own life. Later, he would say it was just logical to him. He was one of these really kind of like high IQ people, easy for him to learn foreign languages. And, he read all the philosophy books. He would read everything, right? The Greek philosophers, Nietzsche, all of Marcus Aurelius's diaries. He could read Marcus Aurelius's diaries in Latin, like he was a smart guy. Might have been too smart because to him, what he did was he looked out and he saw death. Everyone was going to die. And then you were going to go through a lot of pain before you got there. So why not just short circuit it? Why go through all that pain if we're going to end up at the same place? And I was never, no one, psychiatrists, counselors, therapists, his mother, me, his siblings could never reason with him that there was purpose to life. There was a purpose for going through these things, even though we all have, life itself, the number one cause of death in the world is birth. And so everybody's going to die. But what I realized after his passing was that I think he thought the pain of his existence would go with him. But the pain actually stayed, right? The pain stayed. And I believe he would have been better off. And for anyone who has suicidal ideations, I would encourage them to consider that that pain stays and then it spreads, it metastasizes like a cancer on their family, their friends, and anyone who ever comes in contact with their story. That pain is transferred. And so that's what gets passed generationally is that pain. They would be better staying and lessening or resolving that pain. And then their perseverance can be what's passed generationally. And so I think that pain, that hurt, really needs to be resolved to be able to find joy and happiness. You need to focus not on the pain itself, but on lessening the pain so that you can find happiness in the time that we have on this planet.
You mentioned earlier about the 8 to 12 hours or 8 to 20 hours, and then you mentioned EMDR. What does the EMDR stand for, and what's kind of a cliff note of that you can share with us so that we can kind of deal with that on our own?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I always struggle to remember what that abbreviation stands for. I know it is eye movement, eye movement rapidity, or it's basically rapid eye movement and sensory perception. Okay, I can't remember exactly what the abbreviation stands for, but it is rapid eye movement desensitization. Okay, so the principle behind it, and I don't believe they've ever figured out exactly how it works, but why it works is because, let's say you have a traumatic event. And it can be anything, right? It's something that really gets stuck in your mind as something that affected you in a negative way. To process that, your brain creates a neurological pathway, right, for that memory. And then it kind of associates anything like that kind of goes down that pathway. That's how it's processed. It follows that pathway, and your brain processes that thing. So then what you end up with, I think, and these are all layman's terms. I don't pretend to be an EMDR, specialist or therapist or psychiatrist, but what I took away from it was that then any other things that your brain thinks are similar, it processes down that same pathway. And what happens is the emotions that were originally attached to that first event get attached to all subsequent events that go down that pathway. So like for me, if I took, childhood sexual assault, if I took the emotions that were associated with that as a child, other things that it might associate, not sexual assault, but other events that were significant might go down that same pathway. And then with those memories, one might associate those same kind of emotions. And it would become kind of a visceral thing. Like you would just, like that emotion would become extremely strong, and it would change the way you react to the situation. And, it might affect how you're angry at something, or you start to dissociate from it, or a lot of things, whatever was attached to that original issue. So EMDR, by using these little things they put in they have them hold them between your fingertips, and it buzzes, so it creates like a vibration in your fingers. And then for me, some people only do that. My therapist used a headset, and then she would have these tones that would go. Would have these tones that would go. Would have these tones that would alternate in each ear, and the buzzing would alternate on each finger. So it was kind of like, right and left, right fingers, left ear, left fingers, right ear. And then you go back and you relive those memories, right? Like you walk through those memories, and the desensitization happens when the memory then is kind of jumbled up because of the sights and sound, or the sounds and the feelings, the sensory part of it, so that it has to create a new pathway, a new neural pathway. And then when that memory is then associated with this new neural pathway, it is not associated, it's been desensitized from the emotions that it used in the old pathway. So, for example, the therapist had me walk through the morning that I found my son, where I first realized that he hadn't responded. He wasn't coming downstairs. She had me walk up the stairs, go to the door. It was locked. He didn't respond. Then go back downstairs, go to the garage, get a screwdriver, come back up the stairs, all trying to avoid my wife so she wouldn't ask me questions, because I thought maybe something bad had happened. I wasn't sure. And then unlocking the door, opening the door, looking in the room, looking left, he wasn't there, looking right, and finding him. That took probably 6 or 7, 8, kind of back to my 2 or 3 weeks. I'm not exactly sure how many times I had to walk through that, but it was, in this case, it was a lot. And so these buzzing and sounds going off, and I would see myself walking up the stairs, but I couldn't touch the door. The door wasn't there. And then I would remember, she'd make me go through it until I could see the door. And then I would walk downstairs and get the screwdriver. I would come back, but I couldn't use it on the door. There was like these mental blockages, and I would get upset. And then we would do the same thing up and down the stairs until I could unlock the door. But then I couldn't open the door. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't open the door. So we'd go back through it. Eventually, I was able to open the door and remember the room. When I first got the door open, the room was dark. It was just pitch black. I couldn't see anything in my memory. But I knew that there were 2 windows in that room, and that day it had been very sunny that morning. And so the room was lit. It was completely lit with light and with sunlight. And eventually I got through that process of going through the memory until I found his body. The reason I'm able to repeat that story to you that way, and it may sound kind of matter of fact, is because I worked on that to be able to remember it and think about it without sitting here and breaking down into a puddle of tears and hyperventilating and, not being able to remember parts of it and not being able to speak to it. So I think the process is difficult to go through EMDR for these things, but I believe it is a very valuable tool. And so, that's an example of what it did. But I went through everything. I went through all of them in that process over a few months.
This is the first that I've ever heard of it. And I mean, it sounds like it would be very good at doing like you said, changing the different pathways to different things. Instead of thinking this way, you're going to start thinking this way. Kumar, have you heard of this before?
Yeah, I think my wife went through it. She did it recently, I would say in the last 3 to 6 months. So yeah, she went through this therapy session. I'm not sure exactly what it was for or who recommended it to her, but yeah, she went through it and she loved it. I think another friend was talking about it as well. EMDR is a great therapeutic system to untangle memories and experiences and go through trauma. And so yeah, that's what I've heard as well.
Yeah. No way I could talk to you guys about this. No way I could talk to you about this if I hadn't gone through that process. And so, and what then comes out of it is because I can talk about it, then I can kind of deal with it, right? Then I can start thinking about, okay, it's kind of hard it's super easy to get stuck in a situation like that. Just get stuck in this case, the grief of losing our son, right? And if you can't think about it without throwing up, if you can't think about it without, getting so depressed you won't get out of bed, then you don't really give yourself a chance to work through that process of grieving and getting to a place where you can get back out in the world and you can start to, live. And eventually you can find some moments of happiness. And eventually the loss never gets smaller. The whole, like when, early on when I found him, like if there was a picture frame, the entire picture frame would be the whole of him not being there, right? Of that loss. Over time, that whole has not gotten any smaller, but life has happened around it. And so as a percentage of life, that whole is not 100% of my life. It is a percentage of my life, a smaller percent of my life. And I think that is the work, part of the grieving process is just continuing to live and go have new experiences and, finding a way to continue to exist and be a part of, God's plan, the universe's plan. I think we're all threads in the fabric of the universe. And so we have a purpose. And if you get stuck grieving, then you can't kind of go on and fulfill your purpose. So EMDR for me was a way to not get stuck so I could, and I think for my wife and children as well, so we could continue to live, even though there are days when it's terribly sad.
Andy, how do you want to be remembered or known?
As someone who did not quit, until my body just completely fails and it shuts down and won't go any further. But I want to be remembered as someone who, took a lot from being alive, but always loved being alive. And, I want people to remember me as someone who did not quit, someone who, persevered as long and as far as his body would hold up and allow him to use it as a place for my soul to exist.
By the way, you mentioned that book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, one of my favorite books of all time. He escaped Auschwitz and survived, and he kept himself going through Auschwitz through finding meaning in little things. Amazing book, and amazing psychologist as well.
One of the things I took from Frankl was, he talks about, I can't remember the numbers, 1 in 27 or 1 in 28 made it out of the camps alive. There was I think he saw 3 classes of people there in the camps, and one was those who had no meaning and they would lose hope and either die from suicide or they would die from, a sickness, but they had hope, but they didn't have meaning, maybe. And then there was the second class who had meaning in life, but they still perished in the chambers. And then there was that 1 in 27 or 28 who didn't, had meaning and didn't perish in the chambers. I looked at that and I was like, I know I may not be the 1 in 27, but I don't want to be in the first group. And so if I want to be the 1 in 27, the only way I can do that is to have meaning and persevere through these things. So I really took a lot from that and saying, if you're going to have a shot at being the 1 in 27, you're going to have to focus on some meaning, get meaning. And it doesn't mean you're going to survive, but it's the without it, you definitely won't survive.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Fall, Rise, Give, where we explore stories of resilience, growth, and giving back. If you enjoyed today's episode, please visit our website at www.fallrisegive.com. Also consider subscribing to our podcast on your favorite platform and leaving us a review. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you inspiring stories. Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, every fall is a chance to rise, and every rise is an opportunity to give. Until next time, keep falling, rising, and giving. This is Fall, Rise, Give, produced by podcastforhire.com. Thank you for listening.